Hello everyone, welcome to the Scriptures Church, and we are going to discuss the Bible today. The first thing I'd like to talk about is how to be saved and why we focus on that. Jesus lived to about 33 AD. We'll mark that as a timeline. And one of the first verses I'd like to discuss is John 3:16, where in the Bible it discusses, and by the way, we're using the King James Bible here. John 3:16 discusses that God gave His only Son Jesus to die for our sins and shed His blood, and anyone who believes that shall have everlasting life. That's what it says right here. Believeth in Him, and you shall have everlasting life. If you've ever seen Tim Tebow, he wore John 3:16 on his face during a football game. If you've never seen that, it's amazing. It'll make the hair stand up on your neck. And since that's happened, they have now banned putting any personal messages on your face, and or you cannot put any Bible verses on your face during a football game anymore. So you can understand how powerful that is.
Playing for the Denver Broncos, and we were playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL playoffs, and we win. Surreal moment, and it's just like, it's unbelievable. I walk in this big room packed full of media. There's all these curtains out front, and I'm standing in front, and Patrick, our PR guy, there steps in front of me. He said, "Timmy, do you realize what happened?" And I'm like, "Yeah. We just beat the Steelers. We're going to play the Patriots." It's like, "Yeah, I know what happened, dude. Like, why'd you ask me such a silly question?" And he goes, "No. Do you know what happened?" And I'm like, "I thought I did." "Patrick, what happened?" Because you could just see this different demeanor. And he said, "Timmy, no, you don't know what happened. Timmy, it's exactly 3 years from the night that you wore John 3:16 under your eyes." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's so cool." And he said, no, you don't realize it. Timmy, during the game, you threw for 316 yards. And I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Timmy, during the game, your yards per rush were 3.16. Your yards per completion were 31.6. The ratings for the night were 31.6. And the time of possession was 31.6. And during the night, over 90 million people have Googled John 3:16. It's the #1 trending thing all over. And I think he even mentioned something about there were so many people tweeting about it that like Twitter even froze or something like that. At least that was what I was told. And I was standing in that hallway. And I don't think I had the reaction that a lot of people think I did. Because I went from a high and a celebration and a joy to a conviction and a disappointment.
Why?
Because when he was telling me that, I knew that God was convicting me, saying, "Timmy, you thought tonight was about a game. You thought it was about all of these things. It's never just about a game. I didn't die for a game."
The next one I love is John 10:30. This one is really special because I am going to just turn to it here. John 10:30 says, Jesus is God. That is very important. And the specific verse here is, I and the Father are one. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. Jesus is God. That's exactly what he says in the Bible and in this verse. That's why this is special. So, John 3:16, anyone who believes in Jesus that shed his blood, God gave his only Son, shall have everlasting life. That's John 3:16. And in John 10:30, Jesus is God. These are special. That's why I like to start with these. The next one, John 14:6. I'm just going to turn to this really quick, and you can follow along as well, and I recommend it. John 14:6. This one's really, really special because it says, nobody comes to the Father but through Jesus. So nobody gets to go to heaven and see God unless you know Jesus. So, the way is Jesus. That's why we focus on these. That's why Christians say you'll be saved. Because of these verses here. The next one I love is Romans 10. Romans 10. Those who believe will be saved. Those who believe will be saved. And then One Corinthians 15, 1 through 5. 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 5. Where it says, Christ died for our sins. Jesus died for our sins and died on the cross, and that's what it means to be saved. So when you look at all of this as a whole, it's very important to understand that John 3:16 has been banned. I don't understand why they would even want that to disappear. Believe that God gave Jesus as his only son and you shall be saved. They don't want that anymore. John 10:30, Jesus is God. John 14:6, the way is through Jesus. The only way to the Father is through Jesus. Romans 10, those who believe will be saved. 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus shed his blood for our sins. Now we're talking. So, the next thing I really, really love to discuss is the timeline. Okay? So, let's go ahead and go back a little bit. We'll start with Genesis 1:1. God created. In the beginning, God created. We'll start there. Okay? In the beginning, God created. He created the heavens and the earth and the firmament. So, we've got everything right here, right? We've got the stars, all the stars and everything. The firmament and the earth. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. Okay? Here's our timeline, right? We've got Adam. Obviously, we know Adam, the first civilization. We'll put Adam and Eve there as well. And what most people don't know is from Adam and Eve to, well, before Jesus was born, was known as the law. The law age. And in the law age, we had Moses, who was one of the major characters, where God spoke to Moses. Moses wrote Genesis through God. God wrote most of the Bible. Even though a human might have written it down, God spoke the word. And that's exactly what this is. The law age are the Ten Commandments and Exodus 24:12. Exodus 24:12. Moses receives the law from God. So this is the first age before Jesus comes and lets everyone know He is the true God. And oh, by the way, I'm just going to mark this here because we're going to move forward on the timeline. By the way, 753 BC, Rome was founded. So we're always going to want to pay attention to that, especially if you're Catholic and you think you know anything. So these next few ages in the future are where we are right now. This is called the Church Age. where God gathers his church before he returns the second time, the final time. Which is very important because we have already lived through most of the church age. And in Hosea 6:2, Hosea 6:2, it says, God will return on the third day. Well, if one day is like 1,000 years, 2 days would be 2,000 years, and on the third day he will return. So you could possibly imagine this age being 2,000 years. Just a suspicion. So, one thing we definitely have to pay attention with is at the end of this church age is the very special event called the rapture. And this would be highly emphasized in 1 Thessalonians 4:16. Okay. Let's see, I'm going to turn there real quick because this is a very special verse which is coming soon. This is the next event on God's timeline. This is so important. It says that God is going to return, and the first thing that's going to happen is everyone who believes in God that has died is going to rise from the ground and go meet God in the air. It also says that everyone who God gathered in the church age is also going to rise and meet God in the air with the dead in the ground. And this is what the rapture is. This is what we have to look forward to and possibly avoid death. So we are in this timeline right around here. And one of the most important things is the last portion of the entire world, which is the book of Revelation. It talks about the last 7 years, which is right here, which is where we are about to approach. We've got the mark of the beast, Revelation 13, and this is where the Antichrist shows up. So this is a quick general timeline of from the beginning, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. He had Adam and Eve. Moses gets the law. God talks to Moses, describes him how the world was created. Jesus comes down. We have the church age where God gathers his church for the purpose of the return to take them out of this world to then punish the evil and wicked during the last 7 years before he destroys the world. This is deep, and you can't make this up. I appreciate you for watching.